an annual appropriation, and ideally that is done in the first quarter of the village's fiscal year. No official can incur debt over and above what the budget is unless there is a 2/3 majority vote by the board of trustees. There can't be entering into contracts without a corresponding appropriation. The municipality must have an audit of its financial records annually. As you know, this became an issue. We'll talk more about that as well. And that audit and other financial information must be filed annually with the comptroller's office, or, as has happened now, to Dalton, the comptroller has the ability to force an audit of the financial records. Now, on that point, if you go to the comptroller's office and you look on their website, under the municipal division, there are literally hundreds of municipalities across the state of Illinois who have not filed the necessary financial documents, whether it's the financial report, whether it's the audit, and some of these delinquencies go back years. But soon after we had our report in early August of last year, the comptroller's office suddenly paid attention to the village of Dalton and took notice, while other municipalities across the state have been delinquent in their responsibilities for years. One might ask, why is that so? Next slide. One of the challenges, and we recommend, this is one of our recommendations, is the village doesn't have a codified municipal code. And what this means is the resolutions, the ordinances that are the backbone of governance for the village are not assembled in one location, filed with the state, so that all of you can look up what's the code say on this, that, or the other thing. This became something that we learned early on, which was a little bit of a surprise, but became another challenge to overcome in making sure that we had a true picture of what the rules and laws were that had been passed that govern the village of Dalton. As a result, these are the absence of archived ordinances and resolutions not being read in public led to gaps in our understanding about the laws, making governance unnecessarily difficult. Next slide. One thing, given what you've heard and seen over the course of the last couple of years, the village actually does have a purchasing policy and manual. And it's very straightforward, as you might expect. The challenge has been, it hasn't been followed, and we'll get into details about that. But let me give you a little specifics. The policy essentially provides directions for the acquisition of all goods and services. And when used with good judgment and common sense, as it reads, the quote, the policies and procedures conveyed within will allow the village to obtain required supplies and services efficiently and economically. The policy also provides, in general, all supplies, materials, equipment, contractual and professional services required for operational efficiency will have been included in the annual budget. Next slide. There is in this purchasing policy set controls on who can authorize what at what dollar levels. As you can see from this slide, department heads can authorize spending up to $1,000. Between $1,001 and $5,000, the village administrator can approve. And over $5,000, any expenses for goods or services over that amount must be brought to the village board for approval as set forth in the purchasing policy. The finance department is supposed to have a position called the staff accountant. That person is responsible for centralizing and overseeing the purchase of goods and services for the village, and to determine whether or not an item proposed to be spent, that there are adequate funds and proper purchasing procedures have been followed before any monies of the village are incurred. That person is supposed to be reviewing and initiating all purchase orders, payment requests after they are submitted to the finance department for payment. There's supposed to be centralized purchasing. That makes sense because in best practices, you want to make sure that there's not what we call rogue spending going on, and that the village is getting the benefit of its bargain by maximizing its buying power. The purchasing policy specifically says that those items are supposed to be uniformly purchased by the purchasing agent. And the purchasing policy also requires the use of purchase orders. Those are essentially requisitions for goods and services, and it's detailed there. Similarly, the purchasing policy requires that when a purchase order is issued, it has the same authorization requirements as other matters. 1,000 for department heads, 5,000 by, up to 5,000 by the village. And approved by the board at each board meeting. And after an expense is approved by the board, Janice Johnson, who's the Director of Administrative Services, is supposed to prepare a check for signature and payment. However, if Ms. Johnson is directed by Mayor Henyard or someone else, or there are insufficient funds to pay the item on the warrant list, then those checks are held. And apart from payroll, the accounts payable warrant list reflects invoices that have been submitted for approval and payment but not yet paid. And we understand from the John Kasparic accounting firm, which is essentially the outside firm for the Village of Dalton, that there are many items that appear on the electronic warrant list that have already been approved before they are presented to the board. Now, next slide. As it relates to credit card expenditures, we also understand from John Kasparic personnel that credit card balance is paid as a matter of course, meaning that as the bill becomes due, it's paid before it reaches the board for approval. In general, credit card expenses are only added to the warrant list when there's a receipt submitted. What we found is that many credit card expenditures never make it onto the warrant list.
It's going down. It's going down.
There's not a system for ensuring that there are receipts for the various credit card purchases. And what this means, unfortunately, is that the Board of Trustees in many instances was not able to even track or see credit card purchases that were being done over the last few years. So, let's give a little background on Mayor Tiffany Henyard. As many of you know, she's a lifelong resident of the village. She served as a village trustee from 2013 to 2021. Her bio cites that she graduated from Robert Morris College, although we were unable to verify that. And she became mayor as of May 2021. Now, keep in mind, folks, there were two elections. There was an election at the end of February that went to a runoff, and then there was a final election later that spring. At the time of that second election, according to records provided to us by the County Clerk's Board of Elections. Only 9.5% of registered voters in Dalton came out to vote.
Hey, how you been?
To set the framework further, we wanted to make sure you understood who were the people in charge of making various decisions under
What's going
Mayor
on?
Henyard's administration. Aside from Mayor Henyard was the village administrator. You may recall that was initially Dorothy Brown. And then in late 2021, Keith Freeman began his duties as
Do you have a dollar
village
I can borrow?
administrator.
A what?
The director of finance.
Probably.
You would think this is a very key position.
Craving some of that white cheddar popcorn. Did you get it?
Many periods of time
Oh.
during Mayor Henyard's tenure where that position was vacant. At one point, Tangi Miller fulfilled the role sometimes.
Thank you, Debbie. I'll give it to you when I see you.
On a full-time basis,
Okay.
and then she went to a part-time basis by.
Oh, and don't tell me they don't have it.
And worked only remotely. The position has been vacant, again, since early 2024. As I mentioned before, the Director of Administration is Janice Johnson. And you remember from my discussion about the purchasing policy, where there's supposed to be somebody who's a staff accountant that is responsible for monitoring and overseeing the purchase of goods and services on behalf of the village. There's no such position that exists in the village of Dalton. As a result of the small staff managing the city finances, the John Kasparic firm has essentially become the in-house, although they're outside, but the in-house financial department for the village of Dalton. Because of a limited number of personnel, they became the de facto finance department. This remains true to this day. Kasparic firm is a junior staffer who is embedded
What's
in the
up,
village. That
Mr.
person
Baker?
is here multiple times a week.
What's
There's
going
a
on
senior
with
person that oversees
Darling.
the junior staffer. And the John
Darling,
Kasparic firm is
nigga.
involved in virtually every aspect of the finances of the village. Reconciling bank records, assisting in the preparation of payroll, creating those monthly warrant lists, village accounting records, as well as a variety of other expenses. And as you might imagine, ladies and gentlemen, that kind of work, day in and day out, month after month, is not cheap. So the village is paying an extraordinary amount for outside services because it doesn't have the staff internally to do that. And in the absence of the director of finance, without the board of trustees being directly involved, there is very little oversight over the work that's being done on your behalf. Now, I want to also now shift gears and talk about some key events that have led to some of the financial crises that the village is experiencing. And what we found in our investigation, and that's based on a review of contemporaneous documents and witness interviews, that beginning at least as early as late 2021, there was a concerted, systematic effort on behalf of Mayor Henyard and others in her administration to hide the true financial condition of the village of Dalton from the trustees and from members of the board. To step back, let's talk about what the state of play was before Mayor Henyard became mayor. What we found is that prior to that time, the Kasparic firm would provide 3 different and important categories of information to the entire board of trustees, key city personnel, to make sure that folks were up to speed on a real-time basis as to what the circumstances were, both of expenses and revenue, and whether or not the expenses and revenue were on track with budget projections. They created a weekly report reflecting what work they did on behalf of the village, monthly financial statements with the detailed notes memorized in an accompanying memo, warrant lists which detailed the expenditures to be presented at board meetings, and for a time, Kasparic firm also prepared and shared a payroll list. Now, initially, in 2021, at the beginning of Mayor Henyard's term, Chris Marabali of the Kasperiak firm caused these documents to be sent to a wide array of people on an email. Right. Again, the trustees, key city employees, and Mayor Henyard herself. But this practice began to change in the fall of 2021. What we see in the fall of 2021 is the start of the effort to make sure that the trustees did not have full access to information about the true financial condition of the village's finances. And I want to walk you through step-by-step evidence that we were able to review that was memorialized contemporaneously, primarily in emails. In September 28, 2021, in an email to John Kasperiak, Chris Marabali, remember this guy who's responsible for supervising the work here at Dalton, noted, quote, "The mayor has requested that the warrant list for both electronic and regular billing be sent to her first for review and approval prior to it being released to the board." On October 4th, 2021, Trustee House emailed Marabali seeking missing payroll reports that he had not received since the August 27, 2021 payroll. That same day, Marabali forwarded that email from Trustee House to Mayor Henyard and sought advice on how to respond. On October 21st, 2021, Chris Marabali reported to John Kasperiak via email that Mayor Henyard was very upset with him because he disclosed in a board meeting that she had directed him not to send trustees payroll records. There's a board meeting that precedes this October 21st date, where you can see on the YouTube video that she's asking him, "Did I tell you not to send this information?" He answered in the affirmative, and that was a source of her anger with him. He was later called into a meeting with the mayor in the presence of Janice Johnson and Dorothy Brown, and the mayor in effect told him that he should never contradict her in public and that he should shade the truth. By November of 2021, a split between Henyard and certain trustees was in full bloom and played out in the trustees' shrinking access to village financial information. On January 22nd, 2022, Marabali again transmitted the December financials and a corresponding memo to the full list, including the trustees. But by February 9th, Trustee Steve sent an email to Marabali and others objecting to not having received payroll reports for approval and saying that he would not provide his consent for approval by the board if he did not receive those payroll records ahead of time. Trustee House concurred in that same email chain. On February 24th, and this is an important date, Marabali transmitted the January financials and the accompanying Miller only to Tanjani Miller. At that point, the trustees were cut out. On March 9th, 2022, Marabali sent his weekly report to the mayor, trustees, and others. The next day, Freeman admonished Marabali and said, quote, "Chris, please stop sending these emails to everyone. It is a direct violation of the Open Meetings Act. Send this information to Ms. Miller and Janice," meaning Janice Johnson, end quote. I can tell you that the mere transmittal of information where there's no actual action being taken is not a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So in sum, by March 2022, the trustees were effectively cut off from receiving regular financial reports generated by the Kasperiak firm, which would have provided them with information on the true financial condition of the village, and they would have been able to see at that point that there was a significant increase in expenses, as we reported previously, while at the same time, there was not revenue to match those expenses. Now I'm going to shift gear and talk to you a little bit about FOIA. Now, this is not a FOIA class. I'm not going to go in chapter and verse. But the bottom line, as many of you know, is that under Illinois law, municipalities are required to keep and produce the records of governance to anybody who asks for them, with a narrow set of exceptions. And that means that the municipality has to set up a process by which people who want certain kinds of information can get that information, and that they have a certain timeline in which they have to provide that information. They can ask for an extension of time, but what they cannot do is simply ignore requests coming in through the Freedom of Information Act. Let's go to the next slide. Now, from May 21st, from May of 2021 through September of 2023, based on our review of relevant FOIA records and witness testimony, there were a significant number of FOIA requests that came into the village. Most of these requests were ordinary type. People asking about particular addresses within the village, people seeking other information. But what we started to see in 21, and then it increased steadily over time, is people asking very specific information about the governance of the village, and in particular, asking information about how money was being spent. At the beginning of Mayor Henyard's tenure, Clerk Allison Key was responsible for FOIA requests. According to Clerk Key, when a FOIA request would come in, she and her team would review it, then they would send it to the relevant department. There were FOIA liaisons in each department, and it was their responsibility to look for responsive documents and then provide them to Clerk Key so that she could respond to the FOIA. The increased number of FOIAs over time posed a challenge given the limited resources that were devoted to FOIA. So what we saw is a very small staff, very few resources, and an expanding number of FOIAs that came in. There were not sufficient resources to be able to meet that rising interest in the governance of the village of Dalton. Now, there were many allegations that we received that Mayor Henyard ordered village personnel to simply stop responding to FOIA. We were not able to verify those allegations, in part because village employees who reported directly to Mayor Henyard did not cooperate in our investigation. However, in April of 2023, trustees passed an ordinance intended to get the FOIA process back on track. And that ordinance read in part, quote, "Whereas the Board of Trustees finds that the village has experienced an insurmountable backlog of FOIA requests due to failures of village staff to respond to requests for information from the FOIA officer at the instruction of the mayor and her village administrator." The trustees obviously believe that that's precisely what had happened, which is that the mayor had instructed people within the departments not to respond to FOIAs. Now, despite the passage of this ordinance, the FOIA process didn't improve. And in fact, it continued to break down the non-cooperation of village staff, and many of whom simply, according to Clerk Key, simply stopped responding to her when she would send them FOIAs. And as a result, you know what's happened. Some of you, I'm sure, experienced it directly when you filed FOIAs. There were appeals made to the Attorney General. In some instances, people simply filed suit. Now, one key milestone that I want to bring to your attention is when Clerk Key was stripped of her jurisdiction over FOIA. As you can see from the screen, she received an email from Keith Freeman on September 7th, 2023. And in this email, I'll read the body of it. Dear Clerk Key, I am writing to inform you that you are hereby removed from your duty as a FOIA officer effective immediately. Your inability to process FOIA requests in a complete and timely manner has left us no choice but to restructure our process going forward. The village has redirected FOIA officer duties to another party, and as such, your services are no longer needed. I advise all department heads of the change. Now, I want to be clear that Clerk Key denies the various allegations in Freeman's email. But I want to lift up a couple things that I think are notable about this email in particular. When you see the language, the village has redirected FOIA officer duties to another party. Note in this email, he doesn't say who that other party is. And what we know from our investigation is that we were never able to determine who that person was that's actually handling FOIA and whether or not that person received the proper training. FOIA is not easy. There's a lot of nuances that are involved in the statute to make sure that there's proper compliance. We have no idea to this day whether or not the person or persons who is handling FOIA actually received proper training. There was no effort to take over the files of pending FOIA requests, and there was no process put in place for transitioning of the responsibilities from Clerk Key and her team to the unknown new FOIA officer. There's plenty of evidence, and again, I think you all have experienced it firsthand, that after Clerk Key was removed of her responsibilities over FOIA, the FOIA process didn't get better. If anything, it got worse. And these issues continue to this day. Now, let's shift gears, and we're going to talk about financial management concerns. There was an opportunity for the Village of Dalton to take advantage of a $5 million appropriation that had been put in place from one of the state legislatures on behalf of the Village of Dalton. This was in the state fiscal year 2023. However, that appropriation, for some reason that we were not able to ascertain, was never taken advantage of, meaning those monies never came into the Village of Dalton. So $5 million that could have significantly helped the financial fortunes of this village got recycled and went elsewhere, but never came to the Village of Dalton. I want to talk to you next about the American Rescue Plan dollars and funding that came to the Village of Dalton. As many of you know, the American Rescue Plan was put in to place by the Biden-Harris administration to help municipalities, cities, counties, states recover from the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the village received an allocation through the state, which was appropriated in 2 tranches from the Illinois Comptroller's Office. You can see in this chart, the first tranche came in September of 2021, and the next big tranche came again in September of 22 for a total of just over $3 million. The U.S. Treasury Department had very strict reporting requirements on how municipal governments use those ARPA dollars. Somebody was supposed to be designated as the ARPA reporting person responsible for making sure that they were complying with U.S. Treasury regulations. But the contemporaneous documentation that we have seen and confirmed in recent communications is that no one from the village actually took the responsibility to complete the reporting information. The access to the reporting portal was set up for Ms. Miller, the former finance director, but there's no evidence that she actually made the required reporting of how ARPA dollars were used here in the village. And based on the records that we have seen, there's approximately $1.7 million left of the ARPA funds and it's held in a specific capital projects account. Based on what we've seen in the financial documents The ARPA funds were used in a variety of ways, which you can see from this chart. As you noted, there's a big category of $481,379 called other expenses. This was used for a variety of different things, from construction materials and supplies, lawn care, pest control, utilities, sprinkler installation, but none of these things were specifically approved by the board. Now, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amanda Kite, who's going to walk you through some more detailed information on the financial status as of October 31st, 2024.
So now we're going to walk through and largely provide an update to the financial information that was presented back in August. And we've been provided records that cover the first 6 months of the village's fiscal year 2025. As of October 2024, the village's general fund, which is the fund that's used to account for the majority of the village's operations, remains in a net deficit position. However, the deficit position has decreased or improved from the information that was presented in August. And as of October 2024, the general fund's net deficit position is currently $2.4 million. Additionally, during the first 6 months of fiscal year 2025, the average monthly expenditures of the village have also decreased. Through fiscal year 2024, the village was spending on average $2.5 million per month. During the first 6 months of fiscal year 2025, that number's down to $2.1 million per month on average. Following along with that,
I think it's also important to note that when we provided an update back in August of last year, which laid out many of these numbers and showed the village in really dire financial condition, the trustees immediately took action to address particularly the spending side of the ledger, significantly reducing the number of credit card access, working with banks, restructuring some of the expenses. So that accounts in part for the reduction in expenses. And as Manuel explained, there are other factors that contributed to this, but I wanted to note that the trustees heeded the concerns that we raised back in August and took specific action, many times in opposition from Mayor Henyard, to make sure that they were starting the process of putting the village back on better financial footing.
so following along with that, the decrease in expenditures, during the first 6 months of fiscal year 2025, the village's expenditures have matched the revenues that came in during that time period. This is in comparison with the same time period in fiscal year 2024, where the gap in revenue to expenditures was almost $5 million. So the expenditure revenue gap has improved. This gap decrease is for two primary reasons. First being, as of October fiscal 2025, revenues are approximately $3 million more than compared to the same time period in fiscal year 2024, which is largely due to the timing of when the property taxes were released to the village. In 2023 and 2024, property taxes weren't released until November or December, where in fiscal 2025, they were released much earlier. But additionally, expenditures have gone down, most notably general administration, police department expenditures, and public works. A couple of categories that we found significant decreases is in general administration, telephone, and miscellaneous expenditures, as well as in police department overtime and medical insurance. The village's cash balance has remained generally the same since the information that was presented in August. As you can see from the chart, as of May 2024, the general fund had an unrestricted cash deficit of almost $5.7 million. As of October 24, that amount is a deficit of around $5.5 million. And this deficit includes the amount of held checks that the mayor discussed previously, those are reflected in these deficit balances. Regarding those held checks, as we presented in August, since March of 2023, and nearly every month since then, a portion of the checks that were approved and printed have had to be held. As of June 18th, 2024, this was 589 checks that totaled over $6 million, which were approved but had not yet been sent to vendors. Since the August presentation, we've requested but had not been provided an updated listing of the current status of the village's held checks. However, we've been told, though not able to verify, that the current amount is still in excess of $5 million. Turning now to discuss the village's use of credit cards. As we discussed in the August presentation, we're aware of 6 different credit cards that have been in use by the village at various points in time from January 2021 through at least June of 2024. Since the August presentation, we did request updated credit card statements that would cover July 2024 through December 2024, but we did not receive any updated credit card records. As you can see from the chart, the use of credit cards steadily increased from calendar year 2021 through 2023. In 2023, the village spent over $775,000 on credit cards. As the mayor earlier discussed, oftentimes credit card expenditures have no accompanying receipts. And this credit card statements alone provide limited information about the credit card purchases. Given this overall lack of available documentation, it is not possible for us to ascertain important information about the village's credit card use, such as who made the purchase, was it an approved purchase, and what was the government purpose. This type of additional information is necessary to perform a complete investigation of the credit card use and to draw any conclusion about any individual purchase. That being said, through our investigation, we did identify certain categories of expenses that stand out, which the village may wish to pursue additional information to further understand the nature of the charges. For example, from 2021 through June of 2024, village credit cards were used for over $171,000 in travel-related costs. Things such as airfare, excess baggage fees, hotels, meals, rental cars. There are over $51,000 spent at local area restaurants, as well as expenditures at retailers such as Dick's Sporting Goods, Best Buy, Wayfair, Walgreens, Apple, and Walmart. Now, not all, some of these expenditures, but not all, are reflected on the electronic warrant lists that we were provided and reviewed. However, the level of detail in the description of what the purchase is for varies by purchase. Some purchases have very limited information, and the description is simply the name of the merchant, or a more vague description such as meals or donuts. Others provide more information, such as training accommodations, or code enforcement lunch. One area of our investigation where we were able to obtain detailed purchase information relates to Amazon purchases. The vast majority of purchases made by the village on Amazon were paid for with village credit cards. From January 2021 through June of 2024, the village spent approximately $218,000 on purchase from Amazon using village credit cards, the largest spending of which occurred in 2023. Now, the vast majority of the purchases on Amazon do appear to be for routine items such as office supplies, office furniture, and supplies for the police department. And the Amazon order details show that these orders were delivered either to Village Hall or to the police department. Additionally, many of the largest purchases on Amazon, 3 of which we identified in the August presentation, were related to materials or supplies for the skating rink. This includes $5,099 for artificial ice tiles, $33,000 for artificial ice tiles, $5,600 artificial ice tiles, $4,700 artificial ice tiles, and then $3,700 for ice skates.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just pick up and conclude on the Amazon purchases. The various routine office supply and office furniture purchases simply do not appear to be in compliance with the village's purchasing policy as we described. There appears to be no centralized purchasing or inventory control as required in the purchasing policy. So while we were able to see that these various purchases were delivered either to Village Hall or to the police department, there is no tracking system for what happened to them after they arrived here. And while Janice Johnson was listed as the originator for a number of these purchases, what we saw in the Amazon records is that there were 9 other purchasing sources identified in the Amazon records. So lots of people were billing, charging things and purchasing them from Amazon. And we similarly found no evidence of the purchases related to the ice rink that were done in 5 separate purchases totaling approximately $48,000, that they were done consistent with the purchasing policy either. For example, we were unable to find evidence that these purchases were done as a result of competitive bidding process, which an amount of that size would have been triggered by the purchasing policy, nor is there evidence that these particular purchases were presented to the board prior to approval. As you will see, one of the recommendations that we're making to the board is to institute a written policy for performing background checks of prospective village senior and key personnel. There are 3 personnel that we call out on the slide, and based on our investigation, these and other individuals either working for the village or proposed by Mayor Henyard to assume key roles have issues in their background that likely would be disqualifying if they had been properly vetted. Now, I want to go through some of the consequences, because of course there has been consequences of all the things that we've already talked about. You can't have a situation where there are no financial controls, where the trustees are systematically excluded from finding out the true nature of the financial condition of the village, where there's a routine process of exceeding the amounts of revenue with expenses, some of which may or may not be for a legitimate government purpose. The first of these cascading consequences is the audit. As I noted at the beginning of this presentation, under Illinois law, every municipality over a certain size is required to have a financial audit of its books and records every single year, and to produce that audit to the comptroller's office. The fact of the matter is that for the last several years, the village's auditor had been an accounting firm, an auditing firm known as Lauterbach and Amann. Draft audits for fiscal year 2022 were completed, but they were never finalized. And then Lauterbach and Amann resigned as auditor on October 27, 2024, effective immediately, which is essentially less than 3 weeks after we had our first public disclosure of the true financial condition of the village. And on October 15, 2024, the Illinois Comptroller's Office notified the village that it was going to force an audit on the village for not complying with the mandatory audit reporting requirement. Now, as I noted, there are literally hundreds of municipalities across this state that have long-standing delinquencies in filing their reports. But for some reason, the comptroller decided that Dalton was going to be the example. Next slide. One of the other consequences that we've seen over the course of Mayor Henyard's tenure is a significant uptick in litigation. According to court records maintained by the Legislative Council, 48 separate lawsuits have been filed against the village under Mayor Henyard's tenure. 12 pending matters relate to FOIA violations, and 8 pending matters by village vendors allege improper revocation or failure to renew business licenses. And you may have seen recent reporting that on Friday, Mayor Henyard herself was held in criminal contempt for failing to sign a liquor license for an existing business owner here in the village, despite being ordered by the court to do so multiple times. Those have costs. Next, I want to walk you through the insurance issue, because insurance is a significant cost in the budget for the village of Dalton. The village's insurance fees are primarily handled by 2 entities: an insurance broker, which is Insurer Source LLC, and something called a third-party administrator, which currently is Charles Taylor, TPA. In 2024, the village's insurance coverage became at risk due to late or non-payment of fees. The village's premium financing company sought to avoid its contract with the village. And let me explain what that means. There is a finance company that fronts the money for the village's various insurance costs, and the village pays it back on a monthly basis. But because of non-payment, that finance company walked away from its responsibilities and said, we're not going to we're not going to finance any future funds to the village to pay its insurance. That created a bit of a crisis. The village's longtime third-party administrator, that's the entity that then pays claims that are made by people that trigger the insurance policies. That third-party administrator also walked away and refused to renew its agreement with the village, again, as a result of problems in payment. And then long-time insurance carriers. The village had, like most municipalities, has multiple insurance carriers that cover their insurance, particularly liability insurance. Many of those long-time carriers canceled in the spring of 2024 or declined to renew the village's policies. Next slide. Now, this came at a critical time. The renewal period for village insurance is early August of every year. Typically 60 days before that time, the insurance broker will start negotiating, renewing terms of coverage with the various insurers. You had the TPA walk away, which is known to the insurance companies covering the village. You had the finance company walk away, which is known to the village. And the fact that these other carriers decided not to renew, that also sent a ripple through the insurance market. As a result of the efforts of the insurance broker, you reached out to 36 different insurers, including 10 excess insurers, and then 26 non-excess carriers. 5 carriers chose not to renew their coverage for the village. 13 carriers declined to quote coverage for the village, meaning they weren't even interested in providing a quote. And 1 carrier simply didn't respond. And of the excess carriers who provided a quote, they set their threshold for coverage very, very high. 2 set it at 25 million, 4 set it at 10, and 2 at 5, and 1 declined, again, to quote any coverage. Now, the village was eventually able to obtain coverage for the 2024-25 period. However, there were 2 important concessions that the village was compelled to make in order to make sure that it had insurance coverage from August of 2024 to August of 2025. As you can see from this slide, the village was compelled to pay more for less coverage. We have here a kind of side-by-side comparison of what the coverage was under general liability, law enforcement, public official, and auto liability. In the preceding year, the coverages were were almost equal at $11 million. But as you can see, in the current coverage period, there's a significant decrease in the amount of insurance coverage that the village now has to handle whatever liability issues may come up. The other significant concession was that the insurance carriers refused to cover Mayor Henyard. As you can see in the third bullet, there's a quote directly from the insurance policy. The insurer covers all elected officials, provides that as a separate part of its coverage, but specifically in writing excluded any claim made against any insured which is brought by, on behalf of, or against the following entities or individuals, and that is Tiffany Henyard. And the emphasis here was in the original. This coverage exclusion regarding Mayor Henyard also applied not only to the general liability policy, but also the law enforcement policy. Now, there are implications for the village given the cancellation of coverage for Mayor Henyard during this coverage period. Mayor Henyard will have to pay for all defensive costs related to her out of pocket, or the village could decide on its own to pay for her coverage, but it won't be covered by the insurance carriers. Now, Mayor Henyard would then be responsible for any judgments, settlements, or attorney's fees rendered against her personally, separate from the village. And there's an open question as to whether or not Mayor Henyard will participate in litigation that she has to pay for herself, and what that would mean for the village if she simply defaults, meaning doesn't show up, doesn't participate in ongoing litigation. So the absence of coverage has significant implications for the village and for the taxpayers of the village of Dalton. Other implications. The fire department. After 2 years with no resolution of a contract, finally in the fall of 2024, Legislative Council was able to reach a collective bargaining agreement with the fire department union, which a majority of the board approved over Mayor Henyard's objections. The village is currently in negotiations with the police department, but the challenge with that, negotiating that contract, is without audited financial statements. And you remember we said there's been no audit of the financial statements since fiscal year 2021. It's difficult for village negotiators to be able to project what revenues are going to be coming in so they know what a fair salary and compensation would be. Now, as we're winding down here, I want to cover quickly some other remaining items that I know are of interest to the public. And let's talk for a minute about the Las Vegas trips and the allegations against Trustee Holmes. There are actually 2 trips, one in May 22 and another in May 2023, where Mayor Henyard and a large delegation went to an economic development convention in Las Vegas. The convention was called Recon, and it was put on by the International Council of Shopping Centers. Financial records from the village and Thornton Township reflect that a number of people traveled to Las Vegas on both of these trips, and then the expenses of their travel, their lodging, their meals, and entertainment were paid for on village and township credit cards. There is no evidence that any business development opportunities came to the village as a result of either of these 2 trips. You are all aware of the fact that there were allegations against Trustee Holmes as a result of contacts between him and a former village employee on the May 2023 Las Vegas trip. We're not going to go into chapter and verse on this because we are not a criminal investigative authority, but suffice it to say, the allegations are that Holmes took advantage and assaulted a young woman while she was unconscious in his hotel room, that he contacted a village Dalton police officer who was also on the trip, FaceTimed him, showing the young woman unconscious on the hotel room, and some of you are aware that a recording of that FaceTime call has recently surfaced. The young woman eventually filed complaints in Las Vegas and suburban Cook County. Fall of last year, the Las Vegas criminal authorities closed its case after its investigation. The young woman has also filed a complaint with the EOC alleging that she was wrongfully terminated from her employment as a result of making an outcry to Mayor Henyard directly about the alleged assault. And the young woman has subsequently filed a lawsuit which makes similar allegations, and that lawsuit remains pending. Importantly, neither the young woman, Trustee Holmes, or other witnesses cooperated with our investigation. Another thing that I think is important regarding this alleged incident between Trustee Holmes and this young woman, working through the Delgado law firm, we learned that Mayor Henyard authorized an investigation to be conducted by a firm called R.E. Walsh and Associates out of Oak Brook, Illinois. This investigation was not authorized by the board, and the results have not been shared with the board. It is unknown to this day what the scope of the investigation was, who was interviewed, if anyone, what documents were reviewed as part of this investigation or its findings. The R.E. Walsh firm has refused to provide its report or otherwise answer any questions about its investigation because it's not been paid for its services. Let's talk for a moment about Thornton Township. In the course of our investigation, we received a lot of information that there was significant use of Thornton Township funds to cover expenses for the benefit of the village of Gulf. Similar to the lack of cooperation in the village, personnel under the control of Mayor Supervisor Henyard, we faced obstacles obtaining documents from Thornton Township. We therefore are not suggesting we do not have a complete picture of a variety of the allegations against Mayor Henyard and others in connection with the operation of the township. Nonetheless, we received some information to determine that a similar pattern of financial operations existed at the township during Mayor Henyard's tenure. For example, credit card use. We were able to review records from May of 22 through October of 22, June of 23 through, January of 23 through June of 23, and January of 24 through June of 24. Obviously, not a complete set, but detailed records. Some of these records, excuse me, were heavily redacted. They look like the CIA took the documents through their censors. So it made analysis somewhat difficult. But we were able to decipher some of the records. There were multiple credit cards in use in Thornton Township, in the names of township employees specifically, such as Tony Sherman, Keith Freeman, Shelley Miles, Robert Hunt, Marsha Walker Brown, Tanika Hughes, William Moore, and others. In 2024, for example, based on those 6 months of records, monthly charges range from $88,000 a month to over $100,000 in many of those months. And there were a significant number of food purchases and other expenditures that frankly warrant further investigation as to whether or not there was legitimate government purpose for those expenses. There was overlapping hiring and firing of township personnel. A number of witnesses that we interviewed indicated that within months of Tiffany Henyard becoming supervisor on March 3rd, 2022, a number of longstanding employees lost their jobs. We heard many allegations about political retaliation, cronyism, and that people were let go because they questioned the seeming elimination of hiring and purchasing norms. Efforts to verify these allegations, principally through FOIA requests, did not bear fruit, as the township often claimed no responsive documents or failed to address specific FOIAs. We know that Henyard hired her boyfriend, Kamal Woods, to run a township youth program. His personnel file, such as it is, contained very little information to justify this hire. Tamika Henyard also became an employee of the township. And Henyard installed her former administrative assistant, Carmen Carlisle, to fill a vacancy left by the death of a long-standing trustee. We received information of various allegations of political retaliation. You are all, by this point, well aware of Henyard's treatment of Township Assessor Cassandra Elston that included locking Elston out of township offices and then later accusing Elston of abandoning her job. All of those things is well documented. We won't go into details. We were able to verify that longtime township employee Dwayne Thrash has alleged in a lawsuit that he was fired from his job, not because of competence or insubordination issues, as were later put into his personnel file, but because he refused efforts by Henyard and Freeman to agree to a plan to effectively let Henyard take control of a local suburban school district on which Thrash was one of 3 members. The alleged plan included creating a paid employee role for Henyard, firing other employees, and terminating the relationship with an existing law firm and instead installing Henyard's chosen law firm. Can you guess? Who that got it for? Thrash alleges that he would not agree to the plan and subsequently lost his Thornton Township employment in retaliation. Now, we have a number of recommendations that we are making to the trustees. I'm not going to spend time tonight going through those. The trustees have them. But suffice it to say, there are obvious things related to finance. There are obvious things related to personnel. And some of these things, as I indicated, the trustees have already started to embrace and implement, particularly with respect to putting guardrails around the finances of the village. And with that, we will close. Thank you for your time and attention. Now, as I said at the outset, we have passed out index cards. If you have questions written on them, pass them forward, and we will entertain some questions. Can members of the Park District staff perhaps help us collect some of these cards and bring them forward? If you have a card, hold it up in the air, and somebody will come by. Maybe pass them forward to the front. That's probably the easiest thing. And remember, if you'd like an electronic copy of this PowerPoint deck, please make sure you provide your name and your email address. Come on up, man. If you've got questions, please pass up your index card. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. All right, we have a couple of questions. One is, why didn't the $5 million come to Dalton? The answer is we don't know. What happens is monies get appropriated and become part of a budget. It will go to the relevant state department for allocation, but then the municipality has to fill out certain paperwork in order for it to claim that allocation. We have not found any evidence that happened with the village of Dalton. This person also asked, is there anything to hold Tiffany personally liable? Well, as you know, there are a number of different lawsuits that have been filed, and obviously you have your vote. Next question is if supervisor is uninsurable, how can she hold the position? Now, the insurance issue is with respect to her role as the mayor of the village of Dalton. We have no visibility into whether or not the insurance issue also applies to the township. But she can still hold her position, but as I indicated, with a lack of insurance coverage, it puts the village and the taxpayers potentially at risk. And certainly she would have to pay for her own lawyer, her own defense, if she is sued in the course of her duties. There's a question of who pays the services that are rendered by my colleague and I. As you recall, the trustees voted to approve the hiring of us, and that comes from the village of Dalton. Are you bringing me one more question, maybe? Come on. That's right. Okay. There's a question of whether the village will be able to get federal or state funding to bail us out of this mess. And the answer is, I think that's a matter that the trustees are actively pursuing. There's a question, have all of your findings been given to the FBI and any agency concerned? Maybe we all turn and wave to our friends in the federal government who are surely watching this live stream. What I will say is we have been in contact with members of the U.S. Attorney's Office who are investigating this matter. I know that the FBI has also been in contact with various people who have information about the allegations are here, what they intend to do and the timing of that. No one really knows except for them. Just sort through and see if there are any other questions. Someone asked if the $5 million grant was a mismanagement or theft, that we did not get it. As I mentioned before, there's a process by which a municipality that gets an appropriation has to claim it. There's no evidence that that process was followed. There's a question of when can vendors expect past due payments to be handled. I'm aware that the trustees are working diligently to try to work through the number of vendors who are owed goods and resources, but recognizing that village resources are tight. There's a question of how much money is owed to credit cards. I think we covered some of that in our report. The trustees have substantially cut down access to credit cards, so we expect credit card spending to go down. Most of the payments were made and the balances paid in total at the time that they were incurred. And there's a second question, is Tiffany going to be held responsible to repay the money spent on the ice rink? That's a very good question to which we don't have the answer. Okay, all right, we've got the final 3 questions. All right, actually, final question. The others were requested to get a copy of the PowerPoint deck. How many laws have been broken? Good question, but impossible to quantify. Thank you all. Thank you all for the time and attention.
Okay, we want to thank everybody for coming out, and on behalf of the Dalton residents, Board of Trustees, we want to ask everybody to give a round of applause to Mayor Lightfoot. We were working diligently. This has been very critical for us to start to get a picture of what's going on so we can begin working on that. So Mayor Lightfoot's influence has really been tremendous on us getting on the right path.
You know, one thing that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, there were a significant number of folks that didn't cooperate in this investigation, either because they were scared or they chose not to. And there were some people who didn't cooperate initially, but then I'll say saw the light and did. And I want to call out one of those people was Keith Freeman, the administrator. He was definitely Team Henyard early on and wasn't particularly cooperative, but sometime late last summer, clearly had a change of heart, and it's been very instrumental in making sure that we got access to the financial records that were critical for us to be able to provide this information to you. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Thank you, Mr. Freeman, for what he has done to work with the trustees and legislative council to make sure that there was more transparency, particularly around financial matters for the village. Thank you all, and good night.
Well, there we have it, everybody. We have, Tiffany Henyard is a thief. Looks like
Customize and save with Liberty Mutual. That's right.
Dip
So,
and dip some more.
thanks everybody
Our chicken tenders are sure to
for
delight
joining
with
me
every
tonight.
bite.
How did the leader of a small village
We got our mayor right here coming from Dome, Illinois.
attract the attention of the entire nation and get nicknamed the worst mayor in America?
Everything she has initiated has been to promote her.
Questionable expenses,
I can map out their entire trip on the township credit card.
expensive police details,
162 hours.
Oh, that's nothing.
and allegations of retaliation.
Did you take that as a threat?
I took that as bullying.
She's not shy about attracting attention
It makes her feel as if she's like a superstar.
until she starts facing questions.
Can I ask you a few questions?
Yeah, she says no.
I'm asking her. We're going to talk.
Now the feds are involved, and another controversial mayor is joining the story.
We want transparency.
With this much controversy coming from just one person, we gotta ask, who is Mayor Tiffany Henyard, and what's behind the drama in Dalton?
She cannot continue to intimidate and gangster her way through this.
Welcome. I'm Fox 32's Dane Placco. Tiffany Henyard actually has two political jobs on two public payrolls as mayor of South Suburban Dalton, or as she calls herself, Super Mayor, and supervisor of Thornton Township, where she makes over $200,000 a year. Now, before Henyard's election in 2021, Dalton was like any other suburban community with festivals, parades, and its share of problems. But today, Dalton is known more for the mayor herself and the never-ending allegations that she's used and abused her two offices at Dalton and Thornton Township for pricey security details, trips to Vegas, unmissable highway billboards, and the curious donation of township tax dollars to a cancer charity named for, you guessed it, Mayor Henyard.
Nobody knows something. Don't nobody know nothing.
Tiffany Henyard certainly isn't shy about attracting attention. Here she is starting a Dalton Village board meeting dressed like the Wesley Snipes character in the movie New Jack City, later punctuating her political points with the help of her own DJ.
Every single resident. Pay me what you owe me. Thank you, DJ.
Henyard's picture and name adorn virtually every public posting, both from Dalton, where as mayor she makes $46,000 a year, and in Thornton Township, where as the elected supervisor she collects more than $200,000 a year. But for all that money, Henyard's tenure at both has been chaotic, with firings, scandals, and a legal battle with the Dalton trustees over spending. So last fall, Henyard did something that would seemingly generate some good publicity, helping establish the Tiffany Henyard Cares Foundation to help breast cancer patients. And on the very day the charity was chartered, it received a huge donation, $10,000, from the Thornton Township Board, which Henyard presides over.
Taxpayer money shouldn't be paid into those types of things.
Stephanie Wiedemann is the former Thornton Township Chief of Staff whom Henyard fired shortly after taking over in March of last year.
It almost felt like a takeover, and a very aggressive one at that.
Since her firing, Wiedemann has been documenting township spending and says she's stunned by the taxpayer dollars funneled into Henyard's charity, especially this.
We got 10 days. We're going 196 miles.
Last October, Henyard led a delegation of Dalton and Thornton Township employees and political supporters on a march to Springfield to promote her breast cancer charity, which she documented on her Facebook page.
We're walking through Dalton. All right, we're in Brightwood now. We are in Godly now. We in Bloomington, baby.
I can pretty much map out their entire Springfield trip on the township credit cards.
That's right. Henyard billed thousands of dollars in hotel rooms and meals during the trip to Thornton Township and Dalton credit cards. In addition, the videos show Henyard used multiple village and township vehicles owned by taxpayers to escort the caravan, including a flatbed trailer with a photographer, flying a drone, and a DJ.
We got our mayor right here coming from Dalton, Illinois, walking all the way to Springfield. Y'all make some noise for our mayor, the people's mayor.
But they didn't always walk.
We on motorbikes, baby.
At times, riding electric bikes.
Y'all see my bike?
Our township
Superman.
supervisor.
It looks like a misspending of tax funds. I think that's the biggest concern.
Dalton trustee Jason House has been doing battle with the mayor since she took office.
Very disturbing to hear these things or to kind of see some of the receipts that appear to be connected to it. And I think the taxpayers really deserve better than that.
And then there's the merch.
Shirt, 100 t-shirts.
Along the way, Henyard sold and gave away t-shirts and hoodies, also available on her charity's website. A week before the trip, the township paid $17,000 for specially printed hoodies and t-shirts, but won't say what they're for.
I think that everything she has initiated has been something to promote her, something to get her name in household, something to get people to buy into voting for her.
Our investigation found at least $11,000 in public funds spent on that trip. But both Dalton and Thornton Township have been slow or unresponsive to open records requests. So what was the purpose of the 10-day march to Springfield?
I have created a bill, which we're going to speak before the Revenue Committee, to give everybody $5,000 on their income tax when they file if you are suffering from cancer.
A noble goal, except the Revenue Committee wasn't meeting when the group arrived in Springfield. Henyard did later testify at a committee hearing in Chicago, but so far nothing has come of her bill.
I think I'm doing a damn good job on leave.
So we went to a recent Thornton Township Board meeting to ask Henyard some questions about all that spending.
I've never, ever been bitter to the news. Max, this is my olive branch to the media. Can you guys reach out to us and ask us our opinion before you post things? I would appreciate it.
And so we did. I'll ask you a few questions.
Okay.
But Henyard wasn't anxious to talk about her charity.
Why did you and the board vote to give your foundation $10,000?
I'm the face of the foundation. My name is Nowhere, sir.
Say again?
I'm the face.
You're the face. What was the purpose of going to Springfield?
Thank you, guys. Hey, she doesn't have any more comments,
No,
guys.
we're going to talk.
She doesn't have any more comments. Thanks, guys.
That's Keith Freeman, whom Henyard hired at both Dalton and Thornton Township and was part of her Springfield walk.
Look at Keith, baby.
Freeman also filed paperwork for the charity bearing Henyard's name.
Why are you using public money for your personal charity?
$17,000 for insurance. Why?
Thank you.
And with that, her security detail hustled Henyard upstairs and blocked the staircase with a table. So we tried asking another employee who went on that trip.
You went down to Springfield, and what were you hoping to do
You
in
need to ask the
Springfield?
people that handles that. I'm not the one that handled it. I was just riding the bike.
We need more officers on the streets. We need our streets repaved. So to spend that kind of money on a charitable event or supposed charitable event really doesn't seem like the best use of tax dollars.
Take a drive to the south suburbs and you can't miss them. 4 giant billboards featuring Tiffany Henyard's name in large letters, along with her picture, smiling down on the thousands of cars going by on Interstate 57 and the Bishop Ford Expressway. What are they advertising? One says fresh produce, another senior services, and this one simply says we offer general assistance. There's a phone number, but you wouldn't know what it's for unless you can read in teeny tiny letters, Thornton Township Supervisor, as you're speeding by. These are the billboards that have gone up along the expressways. We showed the billboards to Bert Odelson, an election attorney who's been working in Illinois politics for 50 years.
When I first looked at it, I thought, what is she running for now? Because that's what it shouts out.
Odelson, who represents a political faction opposed to Henyard and Dalton, says it's clear the billboards are promoting more than township services. He says they're essentially campaign ads.
This is a blatant attempt to promote herself politically. The township should not have paid for these if they did, and I'm sure they did.
They did indeed. Bills obtained by Fox 32 under open records laws shows Thornton Township paid more than $10,000 for the vinyl signs themselves and more than $12,000 to Clear Channel Outdoor Advertising for 1 month's rental of the billboards. What was your reaction when you saw it?
Well, first of all, I didn't know anything about them.
Thornton Township trustee Chris Gonzalez says the board was never consulted about the billboards, which he says needed their approval.
Kind of some of the first things that popped in my mind is, what are we doing? This isn't a big sale. We're not selling cars here. I mean, if it's informational, then it should be informational. I mean, there's so many other ways we could have spent that money that would have, directly helped people.
This isn't the first time Henyard has used taxpayer dollars to burnish her own personal image. In fact, on other occasions, she spent a lot more. And you can't turn your head in Dalton or Thornton Township without seeing Henyard's picture or name. It's on all the government-owned vehicles, buildings, even on the rugs in the township, where we found a Tiffany Henyard 2024 calendar featuring all the important dates to remember, including her birthday.
I would be having a fit if she was my client, telling her not to do this.
Veteran Chicago political consultant Delmarie Cobb says there would be nothing wrong if Henyard were using her own political funds for those promotional materials, especially the billboards.
I actually had a candidate years ago who was running for mayor of Dalton, and that's what we did. We bought billboards along the expressway, because if you're coming and going home all day, and one of the things I always say about billboards is they're working when you're asleep.
In 2011, state lawmakers passed a law banning the practice of politicians putting their names on publicly funded signs, spurred by these tollway signs featuring former Governor Rod Blagojevich. That law does not extend to mayors or other elected officials, but election attorney Odelson believes the billboards do violate state election laws.
It's a crime. Yeah, you're using public funds for something that taxpayer dollars shouldn't be used for.
And just when you think you've seen it all, take a look at this. When the first billboard went up last summer, Thornton was misspelled as Thornton. Another sign had to be ordered, apparently at taxpayer expense. In videos posted by Henyard herself, we see her being driven around and surrounded by Dalton officers, which got us to wondering, why all the cops?
We weren't opposed to her having the security detail. We asked how long and how often.
Dalton trustee Brittany Norwood says Henyard began assembling her details shortly after being elected in 2021, using hand-picked Dalton police officers. Using a Freedom of Information request, we obtained the work records for 6 of the officers assigned to Henyard's security detail at various times, and showed them to some of Dalton's trustees. This is a Freedom of Information request we did to see how much overtime these officers are making on her security detail.
Oh, wow. 162 hours.
162. Oh, that's nothing. What goes through your mind when you see these numbers?
It's disappointing. It's frustrating.
The officers are paid every 2 weeks, which without overtime is 80 hours. But when they're put on Henyard's detail, that 80 hours balloons to well over 100 hours, sometimes 200 hours. And in the case of Officer Terry Young last May, 303 hours worked over a 2-week period. That resulted in a single paycheck of more than $13,000.
How? How does a person put in a 2-week pay period, 303 hours? That's impossible. That's impossible.
336
Does he never
hours.
go to sleep?
In fact, there are 336 hours total in 2 weeks, meaning Young was not being paid for only 33 hours over that period. Other officers on the security detail are also racking up overtime paychecks in the multiple thousands of dollars. Mayor, mind if I ask you a couple questions about your security detail?
Absolutely not.
I'm asking her.
Yeah, she said no.
A couple weeks ago, we tried to question Henyard about her detail as she went door to door in Dalton giving out water on a 100-degree day. surrounded by police, firefighters, public works employees, and 2 videographers documenting for Dalton's Facebook page.
I want to tell the people I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep going. I hope they post what we actually do here in the village of Dalton and stop telling lies.
But when we gave her an opportunity to explain the OT, Mayor, why do you need so many
Why don't you guys know water?
officers,
You guys, what you
details,
guys
or
know
your
water?
security?
What did you say? Water? It sounded like you said water.
Earlier that day, we watched as a Dalton cop drove Henyard from her other job at Thornton Township to a Mexican restaurant for lunch. Trustees say the security detail picks the mayor up at her home in the morning and is with her until she's dropped off at night, often taking her on errands and shopping. Does she need a security detail?
Absolutely not. Why? Why would you need a security detail?
Oh, she loves it. She just loves it. She loves the detail. I think it makes her feel as if she's like a superstar.
Dalton trustees have filed a lawsuit against Henyard, saying she's not justified the need for security and is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on it without the board's approval.
I see no justification whatsoever, and more than that, it's really a detriment to the residents of Dalton.
How so?
The residents, if we would take the same money and put it on officers patrolling the streets, then the residents will see a much better presence and public safety will be better.
We've had a few shootings, so we need the extra police patrolling our streets instead of patrolling her.
And we found Dalton credit card statements showing that Henyard takes the detail with her even when she travels out of town, spending thousands of dollars on plane tickets, lodging, and meals for the officers. Mayor, why are you taking all the officers out of town with you? Isn't that a waste of taxpayers' money?
Let's go to this one right here, 30 times.
Anything you want to say to defend yourself on this? As for the village's finances, trustees say Dalton is now getting sued by some vendors for failure to pay its bills.
In the last 2 fiscal years, we're $5 million in the hole, and a big part of it is the security detail.
It's embarrassing.
Embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. You don't see the governor with a detail as hers.
Several months after we broke the story about Henyard's expensive security detail, we got confirmation that it was impacting the ability to fight crime in Dalton. And that came in an exclusive Fox 32 interview with somebody who would know, Dalton's now former police chief.
The manpower was just very stressed and critical to the point of almost breaking.
Former Dalton Police Chief Robert Collins spoke to us from Florida, where he's taken a new job after being fired by Dalton Mayor Tiffany Henyard late last year. But Collins says he remains frustrated by what he experienced leading an undermanned, overworked police department, while Mayor Henyard demanded a large personal security detail.
You know, wrong is wrong, and there's a time to hold people responsible and accountable for their actions. But at some point, there would be 2 officers or 3 officers, and depending on if there was some type of event, it would be more officers.
That's for a town of a little more than 20,000 people that's struggling economically and usually only has a few officers on duty per shift. Collins says Henyard's security detail was warranted when it started in 2021 after a police-involved shooting sparked protests and threats.
And at some point, the protests stopped. However, the detail continued. Why do you need a security detail while you're out of town? Who's on the other end of that flight that's going to do harm?
Collins says he became increasingly frustrated because the mayor's detail tied his hands when it came to fighting crime. Just last week, a mass shooting on Sibley Boulevard left 4 people injured. Collins believes the bad guys know there aren't enough cops on Dalton's streets.
But Village of Dalton has its challenges with gangs, guns, and drugs. And if those officers aren't there, the visibility isn't there. And if the visibility isn't there, then criminals have free reign. And it more or less was, these are the orders. This is what you have to do.
Last week, Collins filed a civil lawsuit against the Village of Dalton for wrongful termination, saying he was fired by the mayor without cause and without board approval because his wife is friends with some of the mayor's perceived political enemies.
And our contention is that it is illegal.
Did he do anything wrong?
No. Chief Collins, any position that he's ever been in is a policeman's policeman. He held the rank of chief, but he's a patrolman at heart.
But it is frustrating to see the officers use like that. I'm sure the officers are frustrated too, but they following orders.
As the attention on Henyard heated up, Dalton Village Hall and Thornton Township headquarters became the stage for an evolving soap opera. Village trustees started going rogue. Employees got locked out of their offices, and it became harder for the public and press to attend meetings, including one to vote on the mayor's salary that we learned included a poison pill provision that made any potential challenger think twice about running against Henyard.
Did you know about this beforehand?
No, absolutely not. No word was given to myself.
Thornton Township trustee Chris Gonzalez was just sitting down at the start of the township's board meeting 2 weeks ago when he was handed a 7-page proposed ordinance requiring an immediate vote.
You had no time to read.
No, and then we get pretty much into the meeting pretty quick.
What it does is to ensure that Henyard continues to receive her $224,000 a year salary as township supervisor. But if a non-incumbent becomes supervisor, in other words, if someone challenges Henyard and beats her, the salary for that position drops to just $25,000 a year, a pay cut of nearly 90%. Trustee Gonzalez says it's a political poison pill to scare off competition.
Discourage people from running is probably the first thing that comes to mind.
Is this legal?
No, it's so illegal in so many ways.
Municipal Attorney Bert Odelson, who represents Henyard's political opposition in Dalton, says under equal protection of the law, the salaries of elected officials have to be identity blind, meaning they don't change based on the person holding the job.
It's maybe the worst attempt to try to dissuade people from running that I've ever seen, and that's a long time.
Henyard isn't facing re-election until 2025, but already potential competitors are circling despite the drastically lower salary, including State Senator Napoleon Harris. But if Henyard is re-elected, she'll continue making the $224K, even if she seems to believe the job is worth a fraction of that.
I think this is a job that should pay over $200,000 or $25,000.
I mean, probably somewhere in the middle, in all honesty.
So this is the assessor's office.
Cassandra Elston has been the assessor here in Thornton Township for the past 10 years, an elected position that helps residents deal with exemptions and property tax appeals. But when she arrived at work this morning, something strange happened.
This was your office.
Yes,
What happened when you tried to open it?
it doesn't work.
Not only had Elston been locked out of her own office, but boxes of sensitive documents that she kept in her office were spread around the common area.
This was under lock and key before.
This was under lock and key.
And now it's just out in the open?
Now it's just out in the open. So it has the taxpayer's name, address.
So who did this to you?
Well, I mentioned this new supervisor, Tiffany Henyard.
Elston has been critical of Henyard's spending at the township and believes getting kicked out is political payback.
But this is not going to stop me. This is my job. This is what I get paid to do.
She's the assessor. She invited us inside.
And that's when township security officers stepped in.
Okay. So you're refusing to leave? Yes.
South Holland police were called to the scene, and they agreed with us that the assessor had every right to invite us into her
The
office.
news crew is here to do an interview on me.
Does Tiffany Henyard have any right to do this?
Not only Tiffany Henyard, but nobody has any right to do this to a separate elected official like the assessor.
The assessor's lawyer, Bert Odelson, tells me they plan to file a lawsuit in Cook County demanding she get her office back.
It is extremely illegal.
You can do and say pretty much what you want to say or do to me. But when you start doing things that affect the taxpayers, that's why I draw the line.
After we finished the interview, somebody deactivated the key fobs for all of the assessor's employees, meaning now none of them can get into the office. So tomorrow they plan to set up tables and chairs here outside Township Hall to meet the public. The sign outside its headquarters says, "Welcome to Thornton Township, people working with people." But when residents showed up last night to speak at a public board meeting, they got anything but a warm welcome.
When I arrived, there was security here. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, preventing anybody from going up to the boardroom. I asked him if the meeting was downstairs. He replied, yes.
Stephanie Wiedemann and a handful of other residents wanted to speak directly to Thornton Township Supervisor Tiffany Henyard, also the mayor of Dalton.
I'm just curious to see who makes the decisions about how our tax dollars are being spent.
But they never got that chance. After being blocked from going to the boardroom upstairs, they were sent to the basement where they were told the township board meeting would be held. It wasn't. They asked for a sign-up sheet for public comment, never got it. And before they knew what had happened, the 4-minute meeting upstairs was over and Henyard was gone without hearing from her constituents.
They are violating our rights. I pay taxes here. I have a right to get up and speak whether this administration likes it or not.
And not only were the residents shut out, so was a local newspaper reporter who came here to cover the meeting.
I was told by a security guard that I was not allowed upstairs where the boardroom meeting is.
Josh Bootsma of the Lansing Journal says residents deserve to know how elected officials are spending their money.
Thornton Township is the largest township in Illinois. And so there are a lot of people that are affected by the decisions, the financial decisions that this township makes.
Even Thornton Township trustee Chris Gonzalez, a frequent Henyard critic, was ordered out of the boardroom until the meeting began. Do you think any laws were broken last night by the way they handled the public?
Well, definitely. I mean, if somebody wants to speak, it's a public meeting, it's a public building. They should be able to come in.
With Mayor Henyard now a regular target of criticism, Dalton employees and local business owners started feeling the heat, claiming they faced retaliation when they refused to support the mayor. Even a park permit was revoked for an event that was happening the same day as a music festival managed by, correct again, Mayor Henyard.
Always a good time for everybody that comes out, fun, exciting, good for the community.
For the past 8 years, Darren Bosley has organized an annual car show here in the parking lot of Needles Park in Dalton. But after paying $1,000 to the Park District for this year's permit, Bosley got an unexpected call last Wednesday from Dalton Mayor Tiffany Henyard's top assistant.
Saying that the show would be shut down, but if I move my event to her location on Greenwood, that I will be fine.
Did you take that as a threat?
Yes, I took that as bullying.
Sure enough, when Bosley showed up at the park Saturday morning, he found that giant concrete barricades had been placed at the entrance, and Dalton police were threatening to tow any cars that parked there.
We're talking about two different governments. We're talking about the park government versus the village government.
Dalton Park District President Cleo Jones says Mayor Henyard has no legal authority over Park District property and believes she didn't want the competition to hurt attendance at her own event, a house music festival a few blocks away.
So I'm not sure what her tactics were other than trying to bully us and push us away, but that's not going to happen here.
What would you say to the mayor about this?
Get your life together, get your act together. This is wrong for people that spend money with the Park District to try to throw an event, peaceful event, fine event, and it's good for the community, but you're taking that away from everybody.
They just rushed in here, put police at the front of the door like they was doing a raid on the drug house or something.
A team of Dalton police officers raided and shut down Pablo's Bar and Cafe and Rinky's Bar and Cafe, both located on Sibley, about a block apart.
Everything going peacefully, nothing going on. It's like 10 police cars came in and they start pushing customers from here. And he said, if you don't leave, we're going to lock you up.
Employees and owners say it's part of an ongoing campaign of harassment by Dalton Mayor Tiffany Henyard that is costing jobs and money. Their business licenses have been stripped by Dalton, but they've continued to operate with a state license.
I have like over 23 employees. They work from the local township. Now, end of the day, all the employees, they're going to lose their job.
It's ridiculous. We all have mouths to feed. We all have kids. They are not giving us no explanation.
On Monday, we visited both Rinky's and Pablo's to ask about allegations their licenses were being held up for political reasons. Then last evening, we broke the story that FBI agents have questioned at least a half dozen people, including business owners, a former Dalton employee, and an elected official as part of an investigation into Mayor Henyard. Less than 2 hours after our story aired, police raided the two bars.
Someone seen you go in there. And then 2 hours after your story airs, that police are at both of these establishments.
Dalton trustee Tammy Brown says she believes the raids are meant to send a warning to others not to talk. And she believes there's a reason so many Dalton businesses are having trouble getting their licenses renewed.
I'm sure that they were asked to donate, make a donation, and most likely they didn't make a donation.
Dalton residents had enough, and in April, Dalton's trustees voted to open an investigation into Mayor Henyard and invited everyone from the state's attorney to the FBI to come to Dalton and open the books. Well, trustees got their wish when we broke the news that FBI agents were in fact interviewing witnesses as part of a federal investigation. And then entering the fray, another mayor who frequently found herself in the crosshairs, former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
I commit to you that I will follow the facts where they lead without bias. At the conclusion of this investigation, I will provide and assessment of the findings and the recommendations. And I welcome and urge the full cooperation by Mayor Henyard, her staff, all village trustees, vendors, and others.
This board specifically has made reaches to the state's attorney, attorney general, governor's office. And as we know, there are ongoing, well, it's been reported that there's ongoing investigations from federal entities. Those entities, as we know, can take anywhere from 2 months to 5 years. We feel this option will give us an independent process.
Overall, it tells me that the investigation is expanding. It's not just focusing on the city of Dalton.
Former FBI agent Ross Rice says the subpoenas revealed the burgeoning scope of the federal criminal investigation into Thornton Township Supervisor and Dalton Mayor Tiffany Henyard. One subpoena focuses entirely on Henyard, including 2 businesses she owns, a restaurant and a property management company, as well as Henyard's political fund and the charity bearing her name. It asks for all records, including personnel files, wage and tax statements, time and attendance, records of work performed, contracts, and checks written to cash.
The mayor and the township supervisor, who are one and the same, appear to be the primary focus of the investigation.
The second subpoena requests a kitchen sink of township records, including financial reports, budgets, payroll records, and ordinances covering credit card purchases, expense reimbursements, security details, and the use of vehicles. The subpoena also asks for payments and credit card expenditures for a number of township employees, including Henyard's top lieutenant, Keith Freeman.
It's very broad in the scope. It's very broad in the number of people and entities they're asking for records on.
I was pleasantly surprised.
Stephanie Wiedemann is a former township employee turned whistleblower who's been helping the FBI in its investigation.
What do we want? Our township back!
Over the weekend, she took part in a rally of Thornton Township residents calling on Henyard to resign. Wiedemann says the latest subpoenas are a welcome sign.
I hope that the township finds a way to be able to recoup the damage that has been done. But I hope that the people that did the damage, I mean, there's repercussions for making bad decisions.
Now, it'll take some time for investigators to untangle the mess in Dalton. And at the time of recording this, we're still a year away from Dalton's next mayoral election. But if the next year is anything like the last 3, then the story of Mayor Henyard and the village of Dalton will continue to surprise and infuriate. And we'll keep covering it right here at Fox 32 Chicago. I'm Dane Placco. Thanks for watching.
Well, there you have it, people. And, it's a lot of evil, dirty people. I got betrayed by a slick-skirt woman in my building, acting as a pastor.
State your name. Tiffany.
Okay,
Aisha
I'm getting ready to end this live. See you guys
She is
later.
a girl. She can change this thing.
She had a vision that